This week on Full Circle Florida, the trials of Trump. What came out in court this week? How damaging is it? And the Supreme Court decision that could decide how the rest of 2024 plays out. Our panel is here. Meanwhile, new polls revealed this week a dead heat between Biden and Trump, but one does have the advantage in the swing states. Plus, the spring of protest. Could it become a long, hot summer for Biden? Rick Klein with insight. And my one-on-one interview with ousted state attorney Andrew Warren. His new campaign just launched, running for his old job and facing a new opponent. And the question, would he prosecute cases involving abortion? My questions, his answers. Well, welcome everyone here to Full Circle Florida. Let's get right to our panel this week. She is a former assistant state attorney and legal expert. Janae Thomas is here with us this week. And our voice of reason in these turbulent times, the distinguished USF political science professor, Dr. Susan MacManus. You know, I'll get to the Trump stuff in a little bit, but I interviewed Andrew Warren, former state attorney, obviously, earlier this week. And I asked him about if he would prosecute cases involving abortion if that current 6-week ban holds. You'll see how he answers it a little bit later on in the show. But I think one of the more intriguing questions is, could the governor remove Andrew Warren again if he's reelected? I mean, are we in uncharted territory here legally?
So the Florida Constitution allows a governor to remove a state attorney under Article 4, Section 7. So he absolutely could. The issue is not whether he can do it, it's the reasoning behind it. So Andrew Warren would have to do something else under a new term that leads the governor to think he can't fulfill his duties, and then he absolutely could.
Yeah, Andrew Warren is running again against the current state attorney who replaced him, Susie Lopez. The politics of this is tricky, and abortion is going to be one of the central issues that they're going to have to suss out.
Yes, and just about anybody running for any office is going to have to deal with Amendment 4. But this is going to be highly politicized. A lot of money is going into this race. It will not be really a very nice race. We have to presume that it will be the worst type of race that people don't want to see out of judicial candidates. But here we are.
Well, meanwhile, the other Florida man making major news this week, of course, Donald Trump. As always, the hush money trial in New York, a lot of revealing testimony in court this week. How difficult is the burden of proof in this hush money trial?
So the burden is actually very difficult to get to the felony. The misdemeanor, maybe not so much. You just have to prove that there were false documents and he intended to falsify them. But the felony is going to be the harder part to prove, because you have to show that he intended to commit an underlying offense, which they're saying is election fraud. And he's saying, no, I'm just doing it to protect my reputation as an individual. So they're going to have to show it.
You know, in the politics of this one, Susan, you know, if Trump is acquitted on this first trial, this first case, which a lot of people think this wasn't the best case to go first if you're on the Democrat side and you're rooting for him being, found guilty or whatever. If he's acquitted, shouldn't Biden and Democrats be pretty nervous? Because won't it look like, here we go, this whole thing was political and I'm kind of a martyr here?
There's certainly that fear among Democrats, and that fear was in a bit aided this week by a survey by the Associated Press and the Newark Center for Public Policy Affairs, which found that 20% of Americans surveyed feel that neither the judges or the juries are going to be fair, and 30% believe that the prosecutor's not fair. So that's another concern, a little wild card in all of this. But on the other hand, you read another poll and people think he's guilty and they won't vote for him. This is very hard to really synthesize what's the actual push to an individual on this case.
Was this the best case to start with? I mean, out of the four, the documents, the Georgia case, haven't presidents done worse than what he's being accused of and never faced a jury?
But think of this, a jury in this case may be the very best thing for the people who dislike Trump. It's a New York prosecutor, it's a New York jury. That's a very different scenario. It goes to the point I was making a little bit earlier. It's the fact of the matter is that a lot of these jurors we know voted for Joe Biden. We have that from the surveys that they answer. So in a way of winning the case, it might be a little bit easier to get a jury verdict in favor of prosecutor in this case.
Janae, you've tried cases before, you know, and I've heard from attorneys who say sometimes the case is won or lost in jury selection. I mean, that can, you know, determine the whole outcome. Is that, you don't know how to read the jury right now. It's a New York Manhattan jury. They argued that it was impossible to get an impartial jury, but, you know, you kind of go with, you know, you kind of have to go with what you've got at this point, right?
For sure, you do have to go with what you got, but those individuals sitting in that jury box will absolutely make or break the case, because how they interpret it and how they interpret the evidence is going to determine whether or not he's guilty.
Meanwhile, there's another weighty decision. The Supreme Court is considering presidential immunity. How will that impact not just 2024, but democracy? I mean, they're basically, I mean, if they say, hey, if you're president, you can do whatever you want. I mean, they were actually making the argument that you could take out one of your political rivals, as in assassinate them, and it would fall under immunity. I mean, that sounds pretty out there.
What we have to be concerned about in this case is the precedent it's going to set for future cases.
Yeah.
And a blanket immunity protection would mean that a president in the future could do things like that and get away with it. So the Supreme Court absolutely has to be concerned.
All right, bottom line, do voters care? Or does this get to something that voters actually do care about?
We don't know yet, but we do know one thing, that there's a possibility that all the trials all the time will not be what really pushes somebody's vote. It will be more the economic or the foreign policy status at the moment, and maybe even the campus protest situation.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that still to come here on Full Circle Florida. Thank you. And could the spring of protest spill into a long, hot summer for President Biden? Rick Klein joining us here next.